So thank you all for coming. My name is Jacob Burgess, and welcome to my senior project. I'd first like to thank everyone for coming, especially my panel, my senior project advisor, Mr. Mack, Mr. Parr, Ms. Riley, and my underclassman Sydney. By the way, that's one of 15 or 16 different Hello Kitty style guns that show up when you look up just Hello Gun on Google. So I thought I'd put that in there for the Hello slide. My essential question that I decided to research on, and where all my research comes from, is how did firearms impact the history of America? So that's what we're going to be looking at today, i.e. why are these things in this collage of America? This is some background information on me, why I chose this topic. I've grown up in a household with firearms. I am a hunter, and I have had an interest in movies for a long time, and one time I found this website called Internet Movie Firearms Database, which has, it's kind of like IMDb or Wikipedia, in which you can find out guns that are in movies, and that kind of interest led me into just interest in guns in general. I also have an interest in gun politics. I follow gun politics, and I have shot in firearm shooting competitions before. Before I did this project, my previous knowledge was only this book that I read. It's called American Gun, and it's by the military sniper Chris Kyle. So that's where all my general background information before I did this project came from, and I used that book to make a project in sophomore year with a link search to that. It was an engineering assignment, and the engineering of firearm, that's what the assignment was about. So those are the links to those assignments there. So that was my previous knowledge. My expert for this project, to get distinguished, I had an expert, and that is Marine Corps and Navy Reserve veteran Tim Tuttle. Just some information on him. He started out his military career in the Marines from 1980 to 1985, and by 1985 he was a sergeant. From 1990 he was in the Navy Reserves, and he was in the Navy Reserves in Kuwait from 2004 to 2005 as a gunner's mate, a GM2. And then he did a tour in Iraq up to last year as a GM1. So here's the plan for the duration of this presentation. I'm going to first discuss the evolution of firearms in America, and then I'm going to discuss how some of these advancements have impacted America. Let's begin. So the first thing that we need to know before we talk about how firearms impacted American history was where the world was at when settlers first came across from Europe to America, what gun they brought with them overseas. And the gun that they brought with them was this rifle, or not rifle, this firearm right here. This is a flintlock musket. Cool thing about a flintlock musket is it has the three basic parts that a firearm needs to function. In its most simplest form, it's the lock, the stock, and the barrel. The stock is the part that a person handles when they're shouldering a firearm or holding onto it. The barrel is the hollow metal tube that the projectile goes out of to be accurately go towards its target. And the lock is probably the most important part. It's the device that sets off the charge, that sets off the miniature explosion in the firearm to set the projectile on its way. Before settlers came to America, there were three types of lock that were used on muskets. The first one ever invented with the first firearm was the matchlock. There was a literal match attached to the firearm that someone would have to light, and that would go into the pan, and the pan was where the powder was. Next thing invented was the wheel lock. The wheel lock it spun on a wheel, and it had that pyrite right there that would spark and turn and ignite the powder in the pan. And then finally, we have probably one of the most important ones is the flintlock, which I mentioned before. That was a flintlock musket. The flintlock system, as you can see right there, it was the first system that took out basically two birds with one stone in a device. You have that flint right there, and when the flint, you pull the trigger, that cock and the flint comes down, and it not only opens up the pan by opening up the frizzen, it also creates sparks on the frizzen which go into the pan. And that frizzen was very important because it kept water and moisture out of the pan so the powder wouldn't get wet. And so, like I said, it took out two birds with one stone. And that was used for around 200 years, including when we came to America. Now, I mentioned before that we brought flintlock muskets. Muskets was, the barrel inside was smooth bore, so that meant that it was just completely smooth inside the barrel. And that was nice, but the first invention that basically sprung out in America was the invention of rifling. It wasn't invented in America, it was invented in Germany with the Jaeger rifle America, they saw the real ingenuity behind the rifling system. And what rifling is, if you did not know, is it's a series of spiral grooves that are cut out in the inside of a barrel. And what that does is it kind of works the bullet kind of like a football. So it spins the bullet as it goes out of the barrel. And that, if you didn't know, when you spiral a football, when you throw a football, that makes it go farther, more accurate. And so that is what rifling does for a bullet. Just to show you what rifling is, if you did not know, this is the introduction for the James Bond movies. And if you did not know this, I want to show you a demonstration right there. That rifle, that spiral stuff right there is rifling because it's the enemy pointing their gun at James Bond. So if you did not know what that was, that's what rifling is. Fun little fact. So we took that rifling and we took that flintlock system. Here we go. And we took those, the flintlock system, and we took the rifling in the barrel, and we created the American long rifle. Didn't have a sole inventor. It was invented by gunsmiths all over America when America was first settled. And this is a very important firearm. It was the first one invented in America. And why it was important, as you can see in this white box, that's a brown bess musket on top. It was smooth bore. It was used by the British during the Revolutionary War, and that was only accurate up to 10 yards, whereas the American long rifle was accurate up to 150 yards, so that's a very big difference. The American long rifle was used by settlers, to hunt because it was more accurate, and it was used to, defend against Native Americans, and it was used in the Revolutionary War. It wasn't used by every single American soldier during the war. It was mostly carried by snipers, but nonetheless, it was still being used, and it was still far superior, and just the mix of hunting and defense, and in the war, it kind of just started off our country, helped start off our country, and so that's why the American long rifle was important. Like I said, we didn't have one sole inventor of the American long rifle, but when America first started off as a country, some firearm inventors started showing their faces, and I wanted to talk about some of these inventors and their inventions, and how that impacted history. What we have here from left to right is Horace Smith, Daniel Wesson, Eliphalet Remington, Oliver Winchester, Samuel Colt, and John Browning. So the first one we're going to talk about is Smith & Wesson, or Horace Smith and Dan Wesson. They're known now for their company that makes revolvers and firearms like that, but when they first came to be in the firearm business, they created the first cartridge. Well, not the first cartridge, but it was the first cartridge that is seen today, and it was the first really nice cartridge. What a cartridge is, if you do not know, it's that on the right there, and it's basically what you see in modern ammunition today. Before that, all firearms were what you would call muzzle loaders, and what that means is you can see the steps right there. You would have to put powder down through the muzzle, which is the end of the barrel where the firearm or the projectile goes out of. You put the powder in, you put the bullet in, and then you have to ram it down there, and then you put powder in the pan, and it was a very long and slow process to load. And the cartridges really helped to stop the slow process of loading. What you see here in a cartridge is you've got the bullet and you've got the powder all in one nice little case, one little nice neat package, and then at the end you have a primer, and when a firing pin hits the primer, that sets off the powder. And so that was very convenient, and this cartridge allowed for a lot of inventors to create even better firearms. Before we get to that, I just wanted to point out that there are two different types of cartridge, and that would be rim fire and center fire. The one that Horace Smith and Dan Wesson invented was a rim fire, and the basic difference is that of those two cartridges is where the primer is. The primer in a rim fire is in the rim of the cartridge, and the center fire primer is in the center of a cartridge, and so that's just the basic difference. As you can see over there, those little indents on the rim and in the center is where the the firing pin has hit the primer. So the next inventor I want to talk about is Eliphalet Remington. He invented this breech loading system, which was a lot easier. You would load a cartridge instead of a muzzle loading cartridge in through the front where the breech was, and that was a lot quicker. It was right where you were about to shoot, instead of having to turn it over and load it through the muzzle. So it was a lot quicker, and this type of firearm was made so that you could shoot a lot bigger rounds for big game hunting. large caliber rounds. And what I mean by caliber, if you did not know, is the caliber is the size of the bullet. So right there in the red square at the bottom, you see large to small caliber. So you see a 45 caliber, 40 caliber, 9mm, which roughly is 38 caliber, and then you have a 22 caliber. Just to not get you confused, it's not the size of the cartridge; it's the size of the bullet. So all those at the top are all 38 caliber, but they're all different size cartridges. And these breech loading rifles were used for very large calibers cartridges, and this was nice because you could shoot a lot bigger game with that. Next, we're going to talk about Oliver Winchester. Oliver Winchester wasn't technically a firearm inventor, but he was a businessman. And in the 1850s, 1860s, he started his company, and he helped his company helped invent the first repeating rifle, one of the first repeating rifle, and that would be the Winchester lever action rifle. How a lever action works, as you can see there, is you pull a lever back, and that takes cartridges that are in a tube underneath the barrel towards the firing chamber, also ejecting the empty round from the last shot you fired. And then when you pull the lever back, it puts a new cartridge into the firing chamber. Not only that besides that, it also took out two birds in one stone as well, in that when you pull the lever back, as you can see, it pushes the hammer into place, and the hammer is what's going to go down and make the cartridge go, or the firearm go off. So that was very nice. It was a lot quicker to shoot because the lever would take care of reloading for you. So you have this inventor, Benjamin Henry, who created the Henry rifle, which is the first lever action rifle, as you can see down there. The top rifle in the white square is the Henry rifle, and then when Winchester bought his invention, the first Winchester rifle was that middle one, the 1866 Yellow Boy. And at the bottom is the 1873, or you might know it by its nickname, the gun that won the West. This rifle was important because a lot of frontiersmen, when they went out west to settle, they brought these lever action rifles with them because the cartridge that you fire from a lever action rifle was the same type of cartridge that you would shoot out of your pistol, so it was a lot cheaper. You could buy just one box of ammunition for all of your guns. And so these frontiersmen brought these guns out with them, and they used it, to settle in the West. You're going to need a firearm with you to go hunting and to defend yourself. And so that's what they brought with them. And that's probably one of the main reasons why this was a very important invention. Next thing I want to talk about is Samuel Colt. You see him with his invention and the company slogan right there: God made all men, but Sam Colt made all men equal. He invented the first revolver. Before his invention, all pistols were muzzle-loading single shots, kind of like the American long rifle. And in 1836, at the age of 16 years old, he wanted to invent a revolver. And how the revolver works, you can see in that gift right there. When you pull, this cartridge has hollow little circles in the middle, and you would put your cartridges in there. And when you pull the hammer back, it rotates the cylinder and puts a new cartridge into the firing chamber position to be shot off. And when he was 16 years old, he set off to invent a revolver. His first prototype blew up in his hand, fun fact. 6 years later, he invented the first revolver, that Colt Patterson you see there. And this invention was very important because there are two basic pistol designs that you see to this day that are being made, and one of them is a revolver design. That's the basic design for all revolvers that you see to this day. And so this is important because pistols are carried in almost everyday situations. You see these frontiersmen going out west with them. This was the revolver that they carried on them when they had their lever action rifles. They'd shoot the same cartridge. You see these during the in Texas, when these people come out west to defend themselves against Native Americans, they want to have a revolver. When the police was first invented, the firearm that they carried on them was a revolver. The Secret Service carried a revolver with them when they were first found it, but when they had revolvers on them. And the only Secret Service member to have died while protecting the president was shot by an assassin, and he was carrying a revolver, and before he died, he shot the potential assassin in the head with his revolver, so before dying later. That's another fun fact. So this revolver, like I said, one of the two basic designs being used to this day, used in a lot of different situations. Finally, I want to talk about John Moses Browning. He might be one of the most important firearm inventors in America ever, especially in the military standpoint of America. I have my expert right here, quoted down here. Tim Tuttle says that John Browning did more than anyone else in weaponcraft. Nobody has anything on John Moses Browning. There's a few things circled that I want to mention in some of his vast array of inventions that he created. The first one I want to talk about is the ones in the blue circles. He worked for multiple different companies when he was inventing, like Winchester, Colt, and Remington, and he also made his own company. When he worked for Winchester, he created a lever-action rifle that shot smokeless powder rounds. He was the first inventor to create a rifle that had smokeless powder. And what that basically means is before smokeless powder, the gunpowder that was being used in all cartridges made a big cloud when it shot off, and that would give away your position if you were fighting in war, or if you're hunting, that also gives away your position. It was a lot louder. So the smokeless powder created a not only less of a cloud, but a little quieter as well. And that was a very nice advantage in firearms. The next thing I want to talk about is all the ones in the yellow circles. He invented the first pump action system that you see in most shotguns to this day, and some rifles as well. The pump action system is a repeating system like the lever action system, but it's a lot quicker. When you pump the pump down, it puts the hammer into place and it ejects the last round of the cartridge that you shot off, and when you bring the pump back up, it puts a new cartridge into the firing chamber. So it's very quick. The green circle, that machine gun right there was invented in 1917 for the military, and it's still being used to this day. So that's 98 years of being used as the American military's machine gun that they would put on, like you would see either tanks or Humvees. So just a fun fact about that, it was 98 years of being used in the military. And finally, in the red circle, I mentioned before about how revolvers is just one of the two basic designs of pistols being used to this day. The other one is that pistol right there. That's a 1911. John Browning invented the 1911. And it's a slide action pistol. So when you bring the slide back, it takes two birds out with one stone, puts the hammer into place, ejects the last round, we bring the slide back up, and it puts a new cartridge into place. And that's just some of the many things that Browning did. Now that we've talked about some inventors, I want to talk about some instances where firearms impacted history. Starting with Abraham Lincoln and the Spencer 1860 carbine. Going back to the Civil War, we had been using, or both sides were using muskets and rifles, and they were all muzzle loaders, very slow, like I mentioned before. And cartridge repeaters had just come to be being invented, and Abraham Lincoln one day decided that he was going to test some prototypes for the Union Army, and he actually did that right on the White House lawn. And the one that he really liked was the Spencer 1860 carbine. It's a lever action like the Winchester. It doesn't take two birds out with one stone though. You pull the lever back to put a cartridge into place, but you still have to pull the hammer back separately. But even so, he really liked it, and he tried to get it as our Union Army's firearm. And there was an old general that didn't like it, and he didn't like it for three reasons. The first one was that it was a lot more expensive than a muzzleloading rifle. The second reason was that he feared that if we had repeating rifles, a lot of the soldiers would waste ammunition just shooting them off all over the place. And the third reason was he was very nostalgic. There was a lot of people in the military who had Tim Tuttle here saying that the military hates change. It's a trend, as I'll show you later, of military not wanting to change. And so what ended up happening, Abraham Lincoln didn't get his wish immediately, but maybe a year and a half into it, he actually got some Spencers into the hands of the Union Army. And what that did for America was, originally when it wasn't being used, the military had some money for themselves, and then when we spent the Spencers, we lost a lot of money. And this new type of repeating rifle was new, and a lot of the people in the war had never seen such a thing, and when they saw it, it kind of got popular in this popularity and started producing, these new lever action repeaters that, like I said, affected history in multiple ways. Oh, geez. I hit the wrong button. My bad. Okay. Next thing I want to talk about is the Thompson submachine gun. A little fast forward, it's World War I, and this man right here, John Thompson saw some of what we were fighting with in the Spanish-American War, and he didn't like the rifles that we were using, so he decided he was going to make a automatic firearm for the soldiers, American soldiers to use. So we ended up making this Thompson submachine gun that you all know as the Tommy gun. It wasn't the first automatic firearm. We had this thing called the Gatling gun, but that was, you would hand crank it, and it would shoot off automatically. And it was a big hunk of metal that people didn't really like. Obviously, one person couldn't carry it around. So he wanted a personal automatic firearm for every soldier to carry. So he invented this blowback breech system. You see this little explosion coming out of the muzzle of the firearm. What John Thompson did with the blowback breech system is he took some of that explosion from the powder and he had it channel back into the firearm, pushing the bolt back, ejecting the last round, putting a new round in, and firing off the next one without having to do anything. The explosion did it. The explosion from the last powder did everything for the firearm, and so that's how an automatic works, if you did not know. And so he invented this pretty awesome firearm, but he invented it towards the end of the war. It only ended up getting into the soldiers' hands for a couple of months, and then the war ended. And so his company started losing money because no one was buying them. He tried selling them to the police, but the police, frankly, didn't want something that was too expensive for something that they weren't going to need. And so they was losing money, and then one day, the Thompson company made an advertisement that said that the Thompson was easy to conceal under your coat. And what that ended up catching the eye of gangsters. Now we're entering the 1920s, which is nicknamed the Roaring Twenties, because the economy is booming and everyone's partying. But also it's called the Roaring Twenties because all these gangsters during Prohibition were carrying Thompson submachine guns and using them for their dirty work. And that changed the Prohibition affected our economy as well, and these Thompson machine guns is how these gangsters were doing their dirty work. One day Al Capone, one of the most notorious Prohibition gangsters, was sitting in a diner, one of his favorite diners, and an assassin from a rival gang tried to kill him with a Thompson submachine gun with a full 50-round drum from outside, but every single round missed him, because what happened was the kick from you have a kick from a firearm, the kick made the firearm, the barrel, go up, and all the bullets went right over his head. Nobody died. One little girl got hurt, and Al Capone paid for her medical bills. And that was because the Thompson submachine gun, the early models, didn't have a muzzle brake. You see in that tiny white box right there. What a muzzle brake does is you can see by this GIF, there's two kind of explosions going off. There's one going out of the barrel and there's one going above. And the muzzle brake is a little metal feature on the end of the muzzle with little ports on the top. And what that would do is it sends some of the explosion from the last cartridge up top. And what that does is it levels it out so you don't get the kick out. And that muzzle brake is being used in all automatic firearms and even some non-automatic firearms to this day. The final thing I want to talk about is war. America has fought in many wars. It's a big part of our history, and every single war that we fought with a firearm. First war I want to talk about is the Spanish-American War. Every war that America has fought in, they have fought with a superior rifle, except for the Spanish-American War. You see this list right here. We have the Revolutionary War from 1775 to 1783. That was fought, like I said, with rifles. Then we have the War of 1812, which we fought with rifles. The Mexican-American War, we had rifles. The Civil War, everybody had rifles because it was in America, but we had our Spencer rifles at the end of it. Then we have the Spanish-American War, and by then, this bolt-action repeating system had been invented. And this bolt-action system was very smooth. It was a lot quicker than the lever-action system. And what America had for their firearm, their rifle of choice, was the Krag Jorgensen rifle from Norway. And that was a bolt action, but it was loaded from the side and it kept jamming. It was very slow. And Teddy Roosevelt, his Rough Riders, he bought Winchester Model 1895s personally for every single one of them because he thought it was his favorite firearm and he wanted his boys to have it. And that was a nice rifle, but it was still lever action and that was a lot slower. But the Spanish had German Mauser rifles, and the German Mauser rifle is probably one of the best bolt-action rifles, and the best at that time that was ever invented. And so this rifle, even though we won the Spanish-American War, we saw that we didn't have a nicer rifle, and so we took those rifles back home with us. We looked at it, we tore it apart, we took the design, and we improved on it, and we made our own rifle, and we carried that rifle with us in World War I, and that was the Springfield 1903 rifle. And Germany found out, and we actually had to pay Germany royalties because we stole their design. And just to show you how close together they are, I have these two rifles here. One's the Springfield and one's the Mauser. And as you can see, they're very identical. It's stumping a lot of people. Did anyone want to take a guess? I'll do a guess, Bart. You guys, anybody?
Tan is the Springfield.
What was it?
Tan one is the Springfield.
The one at the bottom?
Yeah.
Nope, you're wrong. The Springfield's at the top and the Mauser's at the bottom. And so there's a nice similarity right there. Like I said, we had to pay Germany royalties because we just stole the design. The next war that we fought in was World War II. By then, everybody had bolt action. And when I say everybody, I mean all these great world powers. Germany's bolt action, they had Carabiner 98Ks. Japan had Arisaka bolt actions. Russia had Mosin Nagant bolt actions. Britain had the Enfield bolt actions, and so we wanted to go and make a firearm that was a lot better. And so we invented the M1 Garand. The M1 Garand is a semi-automatic firearm, so what that means is it works a lot like the Thompson submachine gun, except it's not automatic, it's only semi-automatic, so you have to pull the trigger each time to get one shot off. It was a lot quicker, as you can imagine. You didn't have to work in action to get a new round ready. All you had to do was pull the trigger and reload when your magazine was, or your clip was empty. The M1 Garands use clips, and that was a little different from a magazine. If you don't know the difference between a magazine and a clip, a magazine is like what you would see on an AR-15. It's a metal box that has all the cartridges inside it. And a clip is like a metal strip, so the rounds are a lot more exposed. And when this firearm, when it was empty, the clip would be ejected out with it, and it would make a very distinct ting noise, which is a lot different from the ping noise that you would normally hear. And Germans caught on to the fact that that noise meant that the gun was empty, and so they would use that noise to go out of cover and start shooting at Americans, and Americans caught on to their catching on to that. And so what they would do is they'd have one soldier empty their M1 Garand and have that ting noise go off, and the Germans would expose themselves, and two more soldiers would be ready with their fully loaded M1 Garands. And to show you that noise, I have this video right here of that distinct ting noise. So that's the clip right there with the round. Loads it in, bolt goes right back. Shooting the firearm, shooting the firearm. Here we go. Very distinct. It's being slow again, I apologize. I don't want to hit it multiple times. Okay, here we go. Then we have the AR-15. So, World War II, it's 1944, and the Germans create the first assault rifle that you see right up there in the right-hand corner, and that is the STG-44. The difference between an assault rifle and a battle rifle, because what we were using in warfare up until this point was called a battle rifle. The difference between the two is that an assault rifle has a lot smaller rounds. That's the biggest basic difference between an assault rifle and a battle rifle. And assault rifles tend to be automatic, but they can be semi-automatic as well. So if you didn't know what the definition of assault rifle is, that is what it is. And so they invent that, and then on the other side of the spectrum, after World War II, Harry Truman is president, and he creates the Truman Doctrine. And the Truman Doctrine, in a general sense, says that America must do all they can to stop the spread of communism. And because of that doctrine, we end up fighting in the Vietnam War, because Vietnam was threatening to become a communist country. And so when we were fighting, we realized that these Vietnamese soldiers had AK-47s, and if you didn't know where an AK-47 came from, you see those STG-44s that I mentioned earlier. When Russians attacked Germany, they brought those STG-44s back home with them, and like what we did with the Mauser, they looked at that design, and they improved upon that design, and they created the AK-47. And that was an automatic assault rifle, and the Vietnamese troops had that. And so we wanted an automatic weapon to match that of our enemies. And so we invented this thing called the M14, which is like a son of the M1 Garand. It looks a lot like it. It's that wooden gun right at the top. It's a lot like the M1 Garand, except it's automatic. It shoots .308, which is basically the same as a .30-06 round. That's the name of the cartridge. But it had a lot of problems, and a lot of soldiers were complaining about it. One of the reasons was it had a wooden stock, which was heavy on its own, and then the moisture in the air of the humid Vietnamese climate would get into the wood. It would seep into the wood, and that would make it heavier, and the water that was in the wood would go into the metal, and so that would rust the metal, and then you would have to clean it constantly. And another part that people didn't like was those 308 rounds were very heavy hitting. If you've ever shot off a 308 on its own, it hurts on its own if you shoot one off, but if you shoot automatic, that's going to hurt your shoulder a lot. And those are the complaints that people were having. And so, in 1963, this inventor right at the bottom, Eugene Stoner, invented the AR-15, the Armalite Rifle 15. If you didn't know, AR-15 doesn't stand for assault rifle, it stands for Armalite Rifle. That's the name of the company. And that militarized, it was the M16, and that solved every single problem that soldiers had with the M14. It was light because the stock was synthetic. It was made of basically, plastic. And that, solved the problem of the heavy problem and the problem of the water seeping in through the wood. And the rounds that it fired are 223 rounds, which are a lot smaller and a lot nicer to fire with than the 308 rounds. And this rifle, even though we lost the Vietnam War, this rifle ended up being what we use in our military to this day. And the AK-47 design and the AR-15 design are the two basic designs for almost every military rifle to this day. Military is part of everyone's history, and that's just important to know that those two basic designs are being used to this day. And that design was invented in America, and it's being used in countries all over the place. Finally, I just want to say that the AR-15's brother, the sporterized version, semi-automatic, that is available to be bought by any civilian, has been used in a lot of tragedies. And I wanted to just say that, no matter what side of the gun debate that you are on, there's no denying that this tool, the firearm, has impacted our history. No matter what side of the gun debate you are on, our history has been affected. Where we are today in American history is because of this tool, the firearm. And I just wanted to get that across. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank my panel and everyone. And now I can start with questions if anyone has them. I'll keep it open. Panel, you guys have VIP questions. I know you guys need to ask questions. But if any of you guys, other guys have questions, then you guys can ask them as well. I'll get to you guys. Do you guys want to go first?
Well, I have a question.
Yes.
So your essential question is, how did firearms have an impact on the history of the United States of America?
Yes.
And you're obviously well-read and well-studied on this. And while I realize you had to set limits on your studies, I wonder if you can speak to, you mentioned toward the end how other countries have some of these same weapons, right? What impact has been unique upon America as compared with any other countries that you know of?
I think what sets America apart from others is not, I mentioned some things like rifling wasn't invented in America, but a lot of these firearms that you see being impacted in history was invented in America. And that's why I put the first part in with these inventors inventing these types of firearms that we've never seen before. And I think that's what separates America from the rest of the world, is that all these firearms that were invented here and then ended up going overseas. So any firearm that has impacted other countries' histories might be a firearm that's design came from America. And is that? Yeah. Cool.
I have a question. So, kind of going off what Mr. Carr said, what historical event do you feel like was most impacted by either guns or like the invention of a type of gun? What is the strongest historical impact that you're seeing?
In America?
In America, yeah, probably.
I think, that's a good question. Give me a second for that one.
Yeah.
I think just the invention of the American long rifle, and that it didn't have a sole inventor, people would just make it from their homes, and just the fact that it was just so simple and yet so much more advanced from like other firearms that we had seen before. Like I mentioned before, when we came over to America with a flintlock musket that had it was a firearm in its three most basic designs. That first, invention of taking those three things and then adding that rifle into it and using it to create our country. I know we did. There was a lot of reasons why our country ended up becoming its own country, but I think when we first founded, America, it was largely due to that rifle. I think that would probably be the most important.
And was that the gun that
historical.
could shoot 150 yards
Yep.
versus 10?
Compared to 10, yep.
Okay, and so then how would that affect the type of fighting that was going on at the time?
I read a story from that American gun that I mentioned before, the previous knowledge of a sniper that was, I just up in a tree and there was a battle going off far in the distance, and he sees the general of that army, and he shoots and he takes that general out. And I think just that little small advancement of being able to shoot more accurate from afar helped to, because when we fought in the Revolutionary War, we were fighting guerrilla style. We had our militia instead of our military. We had a militia as well, and just the fact that it was shot a lot farther in all these instances where you would shoot from afar instead of right. Because have you ever watched like The Patriot of like these people walking in lines like a couple feet in front of each other, and then you just go to like. I think that it made it a lot different. It changed how we fought.
Yeah.
Basically, does that?
Yeah, and then is that why they take the bayonet off?
Yep, the bayonet or the ring rod. The bayonet's the little knife thing.
Okay, yeah, that's
The
what I.
bayonet. If you're gonna charge,
Mhm.
you don't. Like I said, muzzle-loading firearms are very slow to load. So if you're gonna charge on someone and you only have one shot, and then you have to take 2-3 minutes to load again when someone's coming at you, it's nice to have kind of turn your big long metal and wood thing to have a pointy end. I guess if you say it in the simplest terms, you have a pointy end, which would be that bayonet.
Follow up on that one, which was more deadly during the Revolutionary War, the bayonet or that muzzle loader? I mean, the smooth bore.
I think the bayonet probably. Bayonet kill a lot more people a lot quicker.
You mentioned the Tommy gun and how gangsters became introduced to this. I'm just wondering if you may have mentioned this, but was there a particular weapon or a particular small period in history where firearms began to be seen more broadly as something other than for military combat? It became sort of everyday civilian.
I didn't focus my research purely on that. If you want me to give me, if you want me to give you a rough, I like that question. I like where you're going. As far as where about military? What it came out of this military? I think from the start, really, because people were using a gun for more than just military purposes. When we first came over, we were using it to hunt, to defend ourselves from Native Americans. I'm not saying that.
Let me narrow it to sort of recreational use.
Oh, recreational use. I wouldn't know that one to give you. I don't want to throw you off. So I wouldn't know exactly when that started to be used for recreational use. But yeah, like I mentioned before, we were using it for more than just military from the start. And I know the difference between hunting and defending and shooting someone because you're a gangster and you want to sell alcohol. There's a big difference between that. But yeah, no, I wouldn't know the exact start, so I apologize for that. Cindy, you got something?
Which do you find more ironic?
Yeah, I find the top one more ironic because it's a little girl with a little peace sign sweatshirt and she's shooting an automatic submachine. That was the gist of that picture when I found it. It said, "Look at this ironic photo." So, yeah. That's just a Remington advertisement right there. If you didn't know, that's a Remington shotgun, semi-automatic.
It's very American.
Oh yeah.
Oh, very, very.
So just to play off this, and off my last question, what is she being depicted doing? I mean, ski? Is that?
I believe so. That looks like an urban neighborhood, so that's probably not the safest place to be shooting skeet, because, a shotgun doesn't, shotgun's tiny little bullets in one little package, and it doesn't go very far. But if she's in an urban neighborhood, you see, I'm guessing that's her house, and then there's a house directly behind her, so I'm guessing there's a house directly in front of her, so that's probably not the best advertisement that Remington ever came up with, but, Well, I mean, Elizabeth Remington was dead by this. This is like the 1950s, so. He didn't
there
have a say in
Is there
this.
any problem with wearing a miniskirt? Well,
No, absolutely, no problem.
I do
No.
that all the weekend.
Thank you, Sue.
Yeah.
You guys got? Any of you guys got? I saw Cody and Isaac and, okay, Steven. Cody, you wanna go first?
Yeah, you said what made us different in Mr. Parr's question was that everyone was taking our weapons and they would make it into their own. But you said many times in your presentation that we were taking other people's weapons and we were making them
That's
into
true.
our own. So how is that different from what we were doing over there?
Yeah, I think just that they were different things in general, and I think they took a lot more from us than we took from them, which, I mean, isn't justified. Like I said, we had to pay Germany royalties, so I think we took the German design and we took the rifling design, which it wasn't really stolen because, it was the colonial period and people were just making rifles. Like I said, there's no sole inventor of the American rifle, long rifle, so there wasn't a sole inventor of rifling in general. Well, there was a first person that said, oh, I want to make spirals, but that person isn't named. But yeah, I think just, to answer your question, I think it wasn't really stealing at that point. It was just the design that people said, hey, I like the design, I'm going to make my own. Kind of like you see today, every company has a type of Glock style pistol that they want to sell. If you don't know what a Glock is, invented in Austria. It is made of synthetic material, mostly except for like a few metal parts, and people really liked that it was really light. And so Springfield and Smith & Wesson have all made their own different spin-offs of that without having it be a Glock. So I think the difference is we definitely stole the German design, and then we came up with all these things like revolving firearms and lever action firearms, and people saw that and they made their own, sort of like how we saw rifling, we made it our own. So I think there was just that one instance of thievery, and that was us. And the other ones were, yeah, we were the only ones that were thieves.
Sounds like I caught. What are you talking about?
I know, so yeah, I think a lot of companies, these days make their own version of something without it being that, and it's not trademarked, so, yes.
How do you personally interpret the Second Amendment?
Second Amendment,
Yes.
personally,
Because it's very vague, the right to bear arms.
the right,
And
Yeah.
regulated militia.
regular, the whole
How
thing.
do you?
I don't know the whole thing at the top of my head. I know the general gist is like the militia part and the bear arms part. I think bottom line is when the government first started, we had just come out of branching away from our own government, which was over in Europe, because we didn't like it. And so we put the Second Amendment in there to say, if you don't like what the government is doing, you have the right to rebel and to change the government and make it your own. And yeah, I think that's how I interpret the Second Amendment. So you're allowed to bear arms against your government if you feel like they've become too corrupt, kind of like the British were giving us taxes even though we're being represented. That make sense? Yes? Silly? Okay, cool. Isaac.
What disabled our opposition to be able to advance all of their firearms quickly and as efficiently as we did?
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
Why were we so advanced in comparison to other countries when they could have been doing the same thing?
I think that's just someone. Oh, hold on. I think that's just when Corona started. I think that it was just someone came up with something and they happened to be from America, and we ended up, because one person made an advancement, someone else got a new idea, and because we were the ones to start to advance first, we ended up advancing first in every category because someone had seen something and they wanted to improve on it. Kind of like how we see these repeating pistols, because the revolver was invented before the repeating rifle, and we see how this is a repeating firearm, and we want to do that but for a rifle, and so we invented lever action. So I think it kind of just was a domino effect where we hit our dominoes first.
Okay.
I can't say, I never knew any of those firearm inventors, so I can't say what they were thinking and how they were like, hey, I want to do this, but kind of just ended up like, I tried to put that in as chronological order as possible with the invention of those cartridges, and that led to the invention of those big bore breech loading, which invented repeaters and so on and so forth.
Okay.
Steven.
Can you think of any other instances where the gun economy affected America, like the Tommy gun, where they practically sold to gangsters?
The two main things that I focused on in my research was that Thompson submachine gun and the Spencer rifle. And then I know I already mentioned, but I didn't really put it in the instances part of it. I just mentioned it for the inventors part of it, was the revolver. Because, excuse me. The revolver, like I mentioned before, two basic pistols, and because it was being used by all these police, and it just a lot of instances. I'm sorry, I don't know where I'm going with this. I don't want to throw you off. Those are the two main things that I searched for: was the Spencer and the Thompson submachine gun. So I don't know of other instances right off the top of my head. I'm sure there are small instances, but for the main part, as far as history goes, the Thompson was made famous through history and through a failure of the company to sell them, and then they ended up, so it was a telephone effect. So no, I can't think of any other ones at the top of my head. I apologize. I wish I could answer that. Yes.
When looking at America with these advancements in guns, would you say that there are differences between, say, pick a specific one like that Spencer that you were talking about? If that wasn't developed, would that change America today? Like, how would you interpret that?
Yeah, absolutely. Not specifically the Spencer, because the Spencer was invented around the same time as that Henry rifle, so even if it hadn't gotten popular in the Civil War, we probably still would have ever beaten rifles. But I think, yeah, no, I definitely know what you're saying with, if one thing hadn't been invented, like, let's say, for example, the Tommy gun was invented, and the only type of automatic firearm they had was that crank action gun, we would probably end up being behind in the firearms invention race from other countries, because, like I said, Germany invented that first assault rifle, so we might have ended up behind. Like I know we were mentioning before, like one of these guys over here was saying how we were why we were so advanced. So I think, like I mentioned, I think it was Isaac, one thing actually led to the other. So I do think that if one thing wasn't invented, if we didn't have one of those, I think it was 6 inventors on that list in the firearm inventor slides, we probably wouldn't have had the other 2 that were behind them.
And how they use them, too. Because that Thompson machine gun, if they weren't used by
Yeah.
gangsters, we wouldn't have
Exactly.
so many problems. Yeah.
With the muzzle brake, the muzzle is a nice little feature. Yes.
As we move forward now, right, do you see, what's next in America? I mean, I know that there's people doing 3D printing of firearms now, and what's on the horizon that you know of that's going to be maybe the next big thing in American firearms?
I actually this might be the future. I'm spitballing here because it's the future. I don't know the future, but I found this gun company. My uncle sent me a link to it, and it has these firearms that have a computer built into them that helps you to fire the most accurate from the farthest distance. These things are a couple $100,000 a piece, so they're very expensive now. But I think that might be actually the future, because, like I said, they have technology built into the gun. Usually, I can open it for you right now if you want to, but very interesting, very cool. I think that might be where we're going, maybe especially in the military, probably, because if you've ever seen how a sniping team works in the military these days, you have the person behind the rifle, and you also have someone next to him using a telescope, so it's electronic, and it helps you to pinpoint where that person is from how far, and wind resistance and all these things. And these people are trained. These people in the American military are trained in multiple things, and I think that kind of firearm with the computer built into it might help them a lot, and that might end up being where we go.
Last one for me. You seem to be using the word firearm a lot, and this one's especially for Stephen. Why are you avoiding the word weapon?
Because I believe that, well, in the gun community, especially in the gun debates, for me, I've got it hard drived into my head that weapon is a negative word. But a firearm, it can be used as a weapon. What I see it as is a tool that is used as a weapon. The primary use of a firearm is to be used as a weapon, but it is a tool. And that's why I think I stay with firearm and not gun. You know, and the gun's still a neutral word, and firearm is a, but like, I like to stick with firearm as much
So
as
wait, what do
possible.
you mean, like chop wood with it? Like,
What? No, I'm just saying, like, it's a type of tool. Tools are used for different things. So I was actually having this conversation a couple hours ago with Stephen because he was giving me some crap.
I mean, you could call
He's thinking a tool of trade.
You could call a hammer a weapon. A hammer can be used as a weapon, but its primary use is a tool that is used to put a wedge in a surface. So that's why I call it a tool. It's a tool that is used as a weapon. Yes.
Personal question,
Yeah.
firearm over weapon. How many things have you killed in your life, and how many targets have you shot? Firearm versus weapon.
Oh, like, something that I've used as a tool and something that I've used to kill.
Right, you
Okay.
use your firearm as a
I've
tool.
only killed animals through hunting. I don't want to get too gruesome here. I have killed
Less than 30?
less than 30 animals.
How many targets have you shot?
How many? Over a couple 100,000.
So you use it as a tool.
In recreation target shooting.
Recreation.
I shoot competition like I mentioned before. I skeet shoot. You know, you throw the cape plate
I was
pigeon up in the air.
saying.
I shoot at home safely. So I've shot more for recreation than I have
Mike,
as a weapon
yeah, I was
hunting.
talking about this.
Do you really have a shooting range behind your house?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
And we
So
have a
that
telephone
could be
pole.
your house in the 1950s?
Yeah, we have 35 acres behind us, and it's nice. We actually have a telephone pole in the ground, and we have a tree stand
That's fine.
on it. That's hers. It's super cool.
Mine?
Yeah.
Are there any more questions?
I saw one more. I was Steven. Steven, you had a question, right?
No, I think
No.
you retracted it.
Oh.
Yeah, you definitely.
Your house. Yeah.
All right.
So we're all going to their house, hang on out?
Yeah, you want?
We can do a tour.
You.
You
Okay.
guys, are you sure?
Are there any others?
Don't plug it. I'm gonna